Welcome to the Qualitox podcast, a show about pharma and GMP. I'm Jan Kugler, host, and today my guest is Nathan Roman, the Director of Validation at Genesis AEC. Continuing our podcast series, Nathan is passionate about thermal validation and loves helping people learn how to implement and carry out temperature mapping studies and equipment qualifications. Today's podcast will cover cold chain solutions and how to monitor them. I want to thank UPRI, a leading temperature compliance service with the most innovative and stable solution on the market, for sponsoring this podcast episode. Hi Nathan, it's a pleasure to have you here for another episode of the Qualitex podcast. Our topic today is cold chain transport and the various solutions. Why were you excited to talk to me about this one?
Hey, Jan, how you doing? It's great to be back. Thank you so much for having me. So excited about talking cold chain. So I believe that temperature is one of the most important parameters to control and monitor in the food and drug supply chain. So digging more and more into that, I'm becoming more familiar with those involved in the cold chain supply chain, the industry, the equipment manufacturers for temperature monitoring, the shippers, the transport companies, things like that. So I'm finding that more and more information should be provided to people in our industry, especially for those in the qualification validation world, in the folks who are doing temperature mapping and monitoring. So, just super excited to start putting that kind of information out there. For those that know me, know that, I basically just put information out there. I write about little bits and pieces of the validation temperature mapping world and put it out there for, spreading the knowledge. So, that's one of the reasons why.
Can you tell me what is the importance of cold transport in pharma and what types of solutions are there?
Temperature controlled supply chain is known as the cold chain. The cold chain includes all food, medicine, drug product, and vaccine related equipment and procedures. And I was reading online the other week, and it said that the pharma industry spends millions of dollars to ensure that their product arrives safely in the first mile of the supply chain. But then who's showing an interest, or who's looking into that last mile, right? So the cold chain begins with the cold storage unit at the manufacturing plant or research facility, extends to the transport and delivery of the temperature sensitive products, and qualified storage at the provider facility or lab, and then ultimately ends with the consumer or the patient, right? So the distribution of the temperature sensitive goods must be transported, handled, and stored in manner that mitigates any risk of exposure to temperature excursions. So, with that said, having a thorough understanding of your temperature controlled options will ensure the best controlled system is chosen to provide the necessary protection for the valuable temperature sensitive pharmaceutical products. So to answer your question about what types of solutions there are, for temperature controlled logistics, there are two types of storage solutions to choose between: active or passive.
So, what are the main differences between active and passive cooling solutions?
Sure. Active temperature control systems are what you might typically think of as a temperature control. This includes freezers, refrigerators that you would store your product in. Now, passive temperature control systems, on the other hand, may be less obvious to you, but these systems can be seen as doers or coolers or other insulated boxes that combine ice packs with insulation to provide a fixed amount of temperature protection. So control temperature units that don't use power to keep things cold are considered passive, right? And the control temperature units that require energy, an energy source or power to keep them cold, are considered active.
In your opinion, what are the pros and cons of each of these cooling solutions?
Well, I think it's pretty safe to say that both of these temperature control methods have worked effectively in the shipping transport industry, but I would think that the active method would be the safest alternative to the passive. If you are, worried about your temperatures not being in a state of control. But in terms of cost, passive may be your way to go if cost is one of your criteria for a go or no go. Because active would be requiring of some kind of a electrical supply or a battery or something along those lines, whereas the passive would just require the dry ice packs, things like that. But it would dissipate. It would the temperatures would warm up. It would change. The passive may require somebody to add more material to it, ice packs, dry ice to the packaging. It would require someone to physically monitor the package versus active. You have the data logger or the monitoring control screen that you can confirm and verify what the temperatures are and control those temperatures and keep them where they need to be. So pros and cons, there you have it. But I'm no expert in this field. I'm sure that others can provide far more technical answers to that question.
And how do you decide which cooling solution is the best for your purpose?
I guess to best answer that question, kind of comes a little bit from the last question. It is based on what what your criterias are, or um, uh, what you are most interested in. Is it cost? Is it electricity? Is it safety? Things like that. I think would help you decide which cooling solution is best for your purpose. If you're shipping something that is fairly local, you might go passive for shipping your products because you know full well that your temperatures can be maintained for a certain period of time in that passive solution, and you would know this by a lot of these shippers, these shipping companies, they do their own validations in house. They produce their own documentation and testing on their shippers, on their thermal boxes, and some companies, some labs will utilize that information and go with that. Some companies will actually take that information, and that's great, wonderful, but they'll do their own testing in house. And I've done plenty of shipping studies or development studies that verify and confirm that their product does maintain temperature for a certain period of time inside that passive box during shipment. From as simple as leaving it in the warehouse for a certain period of time under test, or actually putting it on a truck, putting it on an airplane, shipping it to where it needs to go, and doing a verification of temperatures when they arrive. So things like that would probably best and help you decide which cooling solution would be best for you.
What can you tell me about the current trends and challenges in the field from the regulatory perspective or implementation, for example?
There seems to be an increasing number of trends in the cold chain field. There's definitely been a rapid expansion in the food and pharmaceutical industry that definitely puts a high demand on the cold chain logistics from new products with a shorter shelf life and a greater temperature sensitivity to the massive vaccine distribution we saw over the last couple of years is really creating a shift in this industry, and it opens the door for new possibilities and technologies in this industry. The cold chain industry has definitely become more globalized than in prior years. There's a rise of online shopping or grocery services um, that, although very convenient for us, put a lot of pressure on the cold chain. Cold shipping services. There's also been a rise in the number of offsite cold storage facilities. It's definitely no secret that our industry, that manufacturing facilities or laboratories, are looking for more space, and this definitely opens up the door for you to create offsite storage or offsite cold storage solutions. And of course, technology has increasingly changed for the cold chain logistics. For example, the use of those GPS enabled sensors in refrigerated containers provide some real time temperature updates throughout the product's shipment.
And what can you tell me about how the regulatory requirements impacted the implementation of different cooling technologies and maybe even the development of the technologies throughout the years?
Regulatory requirements that seem to have an impact on the cold chain logistics would be requirements around proper temperature controlled storage, temperature controlled transport, training, and your standards and procedures. So, an important element to that process in the cold chain is temperature mapping and monitoring. Achieving the regulatory standards requires temperature monitoring, proper documentation and record keeping, and continuous testing. If a unit would fail, or if there's the temperature excursion that causes failure, and that temperature sensitive product is exposed to conditions outside its required temperature range, those cold chain logistics suppliers they must contact manufacturers immediately, or you put into jeopardy the product's efficacy and ultimately the end consumer.
What challenges have you faced when trying to implement these cooling solutions throughout the years?
A most recent challenge that I can recall is a company that had purchased a passive cooling system, and their inexperience of guidelines or regulations surrounding proper validation led them to store their highly sensitive and expensive product in those dewars with no calibration of the monitoring sensors, nor have they done any validation studies on the equipment. They were unable to provide documentation with any scientific rationale around their process, their control methods, or temperature tracking. They had just gone on relying on the data package that came from the vendor, which was merely a checklist and a cut sheet. And so that's why proper validation planning is critical. Validating for your own storage and environmental scenario, that will ensure the data that you collect is as reliable as possible.
Before we continue to the next question, let me thank UPRI again for sponsoring this event. If you want to upgrade your data loggers, you should know that UPRI's wireless temperature data logger constantly sends data to web-based software via Wi-Fi. It provides real-time temperature reports of your refrigerator, freezer, storage area, etc. For ultimate compliance, once temperature deviation happens, it will immediately send you an SMS and email alarm, which minimizes the risk during the monitoring process, so make sure to visit them at eupry.com. It's eupry.com later today. Now let's talk a bit about the temperature monitoring of those devices. So how does temperature monitoring during the transport help ensure product safety?
Sure. Temperature monitoring during transport definitely helps ensure product safety by monitoring the temperatures of those pharmaceutical or life science products, ensuring that during transport, the data loggers can provide alerts when potentially dangerous temperature excursions are about to occur or when they do occur, as well as provide assurance that products maintain the safe temperatures throughout the transport.
And what are the common ways to monitor temperature in cooling systems? And is there a difference in application of temperature monitoring between active and passive cooling solutions?
So, some common ways for measuring temperature or monitoring temperature in a passive or an active cooling solution would be that in an active system, they're going to have a built in or manufactured sensor in place, hard, fast, installed, mounted sensor. Whether it's in the unit, the wall of the unit, or in the ceiling of the unit, or they may have a wired sensor that is routed through a pass through that is then mounted. So, in for a passive system like a shipping container or a doer, it may contain a temporary thermocouple or remote data logger inside the package with the material to monitor that temperature. Many passive units, like a doer, for example, will have the thermocouple or the RTD that is routed through the lid of the unit and down the neck of the doer, monitoring the space inside that unit. So to sum that up, you can have temporary removable monitoring, or you can have a more permanent monitoring solution for those active cooling solutions.
And what kind of issues can arise from improper cooling or incorrect temperature monitoring in pharma transport?
It's a known fact that pharma cold chain is organized around three different temperature ranges, right? You have refrigerated, which is 2 to 8, ultra low or deep frozen, which is the range is from -30 to -80 C, respectively. And then the cryogenic or the LN2 vapor phase, which is approximately -160 to -180 degrees Celsius. Again, that's the vapor phase. That's not the LN2 temperature. But the distribution of those temperature sensitive goods, they need to be transported, handled, and stored in a manner that mitigates the risk of exposure to temperature excursions. If a cold system fails and the goods either thaw or become exposed to warmer temperatures, they end up contaminated or rendered ineffective. One example of incorrect temperature tracking and monitoring is that when dealing with vaccines or samples, blood, or even cell and gene therapies, even the slightest temperature excursion or equipment failure or delay could result in a loss of product worth millions. In fact, I've recently just read that failures in the pharma cold chain alone cost the industry an estimated $35 billion annually.
And what can you tell me about how has the technology that has developed throughout the years enabled more accurate temperature tracking during the transport of medicinal products?
The global pharma cold chain continues to expand, and so does its new technologies. The demand for real time temperature tracking, humidity levels, and its locations definitely increasing. With the latest technology and cloud based platforms, data from these real time temperature trends and alerts provides real actionable information for the manufacturer to use and identify and to mitigate temperature excursions and other potential deviations.
What do you think we can expect to see in the future with regards to cooling solutions and temperature monitoring during transport?
Jan, I'm sure that you can expect to see that pharmaceutical and biotech companies will continue to have a need for the real time temperature monitoring and the visibility solution that ensures successful delivery of their products by reducing temperature excursions and ensuring product integrity and quality. In addition to the storage or shipment continually being monitored, you'll see a more robust validation plan as a part of a complete cooling solution supporting the full temperature range of your cold chain that, of course, follows the guidelines of good manufacturing practices.
Nathan, what sources can you recommend for staying updated with the latest regulations on cooling systems and their monitoring?
As per usual, Jan, I would say in order to stay up to date with the latest regulations and trends, a good place to start would be to involve yourself in the industry groups that are out there, focusing on different GMP compliance aspects such as validation, good distribution practices, IT compliance, laboratory management, and other topics. ISP is one of the groups that I belong to, but there are many other industry associations or not for profit organizations. Some of these organizations provide information and examples of things that we're talking about today of active and passive shipping systems and equipment used for transport. And they provide training for good distribution practices. The one particular group I'm thinking of has actually a live online training class called GDP for Beginners. But you can read blogs, articles, and follow regulatory agencies or companies on social media. For all things temperature mapping, you can of course follow me. For example, you can attend conferences or even talk to your peers, and networking helps you to stay current and involved. Some keywords that I thought I'd throw at you that you can Google or search would be cold chain logistics, temperature sensitive shipments, vaccine supply chain, active and passive shipping systems. And you could go and type temperature mapping into LinkedIn, and I'm sure the results would be endless. So those are a few of my ideas.
Is there anything else that you would like to add, which we have not covered yet, but you believe it's super important for our audience to know or hear about this topic?
Sure. Thanks, Jan. I wanted to just let the listeners know that I do have material, um, that they can reach out to me and request. I do have an ebook called Six Steps to Effective Temperature Mapping, which is just about providing guidance and some best practices around qualification and the actual temperature mapping. So that is an ebook that I do sell. I do want to also let you know I do have other documents that are free, other tools that I do usually post about and talk about. That upon reaching out to me, I can absolutely provide some help or some support around those areas. I also wanted to quickly put in here that the fact that the work that you do matters, the work that we do matters, and helping that life sciences organizations ensure the quality and safety when carrying out these qualification and validation tests that we do. Um, it ultimately it leads to saving lives. So I just wanted to put it out there again to let you know that what you do, it truly matters, and I thank you.
So, Nathan, thank you very much for another fascinating episode. I'm confident that our audience will gain a lot from your insights. It will help them stay more current with regulations, and it will help them improve and uh, keep their cold chain activities on track, which includes the transport and the monitoring of their product. So, thank you very much, and see you in the next one.
Absolutely, Jan. I really appreciate the time that we have here together, and I can't wait till we meet again. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Qualitalks podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star review. If you want to learn more about GMP, Please visit us at www.qualistery.com. Stay compliant and see you at the next one.